From 50 Western classics, you can see his face. The hero who came to the rescue every time. However, Randolph Scott's personal life caused controversy in Hollywood. His odd union with an heiress from a different state. He shares a beach house with another well-known actor. When he was eventually taken by death, members of the family were deeply moved by what they learned. Their lives were profoundly altered by this humble cowboy's clandestinely amassed money. In the end, the last laugh went to the man who hardly ever smiled on film. On January 23, 1898, Randolph Scott was born in Orange County, Virginia. However, his family did not reside here. They were visiting family when it occurred. Charlotte, North Carolina, was the birthplace of all 5 of his siblings. And he was the only one not. In addition to becoming the first certified public accountant in North Carolina, his father, George Grant Scott, was a textile engineer. He was a pioneer as a result. Lucille, his mother, was from a well-to-do and well-respected family in North Carolina. Randolph came from a wealthy and intelligent family. His family was well regarded in Southern culture and had Scottish ancestry. He had a great start in life because of this. He was raised in a large, tasteful house in Charlotte that is still standing. They moved into a stately home created by renowned architect Louis Asbury in 1927. Randolph had lived a life like that. Well-connected acquaintances, exclusive schools, and the serene assurance of someone who has never had to worry about money. He attended Virginia's Woodbury Forest School. The place wasn't merely a school. There, the sons of wealthy families rose to positions of authority in the South. He was shaped by that school. It gave him confidence that he could accomplish anything, as well as composure and charm. Randolph was not only a well-groomed young man, though, he was also athletic. He was a baseball and football player. He raced horses and swam competitively. These weren't only pastimes. They were costly, serious sports. He aspired to be an All-American while playing football at Georgia Tech. But that hope was dashed by a serious back injury. Then, following in his father's footsteps, he transferred to the University of North Carolina to study textile engineering. The odd thing is that he later became ideal for Western movies because of the same hobbies, particularly writing. He didn't have to pretend to be a horseman. He could already. He had a natural on-screen presence as a result. Old Southern values also influenced Randolph. He participated in the United Daughters of the Confederacy's plays. These plays weren't your typical ones. They took pleasure in their Southern heritage. And were replete with themes of sacrifice, loss, and dignity. He acquired a gentle, aristocratic Southern accent from those roles, which contributed to his charisma on television. He learned to be stoic, arrogant, and proper from the culture in which he was raised. Later on, his films depicted a man just like that. Not only did his family's wealth assist, but it completely altered his course. Randolph had a safety net during World War I when many guys from the South were having trouble finding work. There was no need for him to rush after the battle. Because of his extensive network, his father was able to introduce him to Howard Hughes. In 1928, Randolph entered Hollywood with that letter. Starting at the bottom was not necessary for him. He showed up with self-assurance, good appearance, and influential friends. Few could equal that mix. Randolph was only 19 when the United States entered World War I in April 1917. That July, he joined the National Guard rather than remaining at home. He didn't wait, even though the majority of men who joined the war effort were older. He was promoted to corporal by October. He had attained sergeant status by February 1918. Randolph wanted to serve, despite his father's attempts to get him accepted to West Point. That decision demonstrated his self-control and fit in with the courageous roles he would perform in subsequent movies. He served on the front lines in France. He served in the 2nd Trench Mortar Battalion as a member of a 2-man squad. His work was hazardous. Under enemy attack, he directed artillery fire from small shelters. Before each expedition, he and his buddy gripped their dog tags and read pocket testaments. He never discussed what he'd seen there in public. His work was precise. He transmitted updates to accurately target the guns using hand-calculated math. Men might perish if he made a mistake. He was impacted by that kind of pressure, which contributed to the quiet, grizzled strength that others observed in his parts. Additionally, his military experience equipped him with practical talents that Hollywood was unable to replicate. He gained experience riding horses across difficult terrain. He used bayonets and weapons for training. It wasn't a prop. They served as tools for survival. Randolph's portrayal of soldiers and cowboys later on felt authentic. Since it was. He wasn't merely playing the hero. He had experienced it. Randolph took his time returning home when the war finished in November 1918. He remained in France and attended Saumur's artillery officer candidate school. By May 1919, he was promoted to second lieutenant. He proceeded to Georgia Tech to pursue a new dream of being a top football player after he eventually returned to the United States. He pushed himself back into sports and joined a fraternity. However, his previous injury returned. And that dream was over. Thus, he relocated once more to get an engineering degree at the University of North Carolina. It was short-lived. The thrill of the football field or the battlefield was too great for the classroom. He joined his father's textile company after graduating from college. He put in a lot of work at that firm. Prior to becoming an office manager, he worked as an accountant and then an auditor. He was responsible and focused. But he was not excited by that existence. It was insufficient, so he took a chance in 1927. He gave up a secure career for something completely unpredictable. While performing at the Los Angeles Country Club in 1929, an unforeseen circumstance occurred. Howard Hughes was teamed with him. Yes, that Howard Hughes, the wealthy and eccentric filmmaker and pilot. Scott had no idea how drastically one game of golf would alter his life. Scott's tall stature, attractive appearance, and southern charm caught Hughes' attention. He was the kind of guy Hollywood needed. Hughes gave him a brief, uncredited role in the far call by the end of the game. It was only a small portion of a film. However, it was a beginning. Scott might never have entered the movie industry if he hadn't gone to golf that day. Scott discovered that appearances weren't enough after that fortunate break. He needed expertise. He therefore became a member of the Pasadena Community Playhouse. Future celebrities like Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman received their training at the best acting school on the West Coast. Scott put forth a lot of effort. He studied stage acting, singing, and dance. Cecil B. DeMille, the renowned director, came to see a play in 1931. He noticed Scott and was impressed. "That young man has something Hollywood can't teach," he said to someone. For Scott, that moment opened doors. He was no longer only a fortunate golfer. He was developing into a legitimate actor. A strange incident occurred behind the scenes of the Western movie The Virginian that same year. The celebrity Gary Cooper required assistance with his Virginia accent. A true Virginian would be the ideal person to instruct him. Cooper's coach, Scott, took over. The main actor wasn't him. Not even credit was given to him. Critics took notice, though, since he gave Cooper a more genuine tone. Cooper became more famous as a result of that movie, while Scott remained in the background. Nevertheless, it demonstrated Scott's genuine generosity and professionalism and helped the two men forge a lifelong relationship. Things started to pick up in 1932. Scott agreed to a deal with Paramount Films. Back then, that was a huge issue. He collaborated with Nancy Carroll and a young Cary Grant on his first significant motion picture, Hot Saturday. The film's audacious plot caused a stir, but there was more going on behind the scenes. Grant and Scott grew to be good friends. They even shared a beach house in Malibu for more than a decade. They were the subject of rumors, conjecture, and magazine articles. However, the reality was straightforward. They shared a strong, enduring friendship that is uncommon in Hollywood. Scott's roles continued to expand during this period. He was no longer merely a supporting character. Of course, his good looks and southern charm helped. At 6 feet 2 inches, he exuded a composed, self-assured demeanor that audiences found appealing. He was receiving larger roles by 1934. He frequently portrayed devoted friends or romantic rivals, but he always had a distinct presence on screen. On paper, Randolph Scott's first marriage appeared to be ideal. On March 23, 1936, he wed Marion DuPont Somerville. She was the granddaughter of the DuPont Chemical Empire's founder and a wealthy heiress. His age was 38. Her age was 41. In the world of horse racing, she was a queen. His career in Hollywood was taking off. It took months for the news to cover their wedding because it was so private. Since Scott had served as best man at Marion's first wedding, their own union felt like the continuation of a lifelong relationship. However, beneath the glamour, something wasn't quite right. President James Madison's 55-room Montpelier residence in Virginia was where Marion stayed. In Los Angeles, Scott never stopped working. He was so tall, 6 feet, 4 inches, that they had to dig a pit in the floor to allow him to stand up straight when working out in the gym she had built for him in her basement. They were rarely spotted together. Hollywood did not appeal to Marion. Her horse Battleship became the first American-bred winner of the Grand National Steeplechase in England in 1938, making history. She was unable to attend the New York festivities. Scott took her position. This long-distance marriage lasted for 3 years before ending in 1939. Just 2 lives going in opposite directions, no arguments, no controversy. Marion maintained the Scott name until her death in 1983, despite the fact that they were childless. A silent expression of reverence that never went away. Scott moved in with Cary Grant in 1935, 1 year before to the dissolution of their marriage. Their Malibu home was large, 5,530 square feet, and exquisite. It was referred to as Bachelor Hall. They were young, wealthy, attractive, and frequently pictured relaxing on the beach or playing golf. Even pictures of them working out together were produced by the studios. The tabloids were obsessed. Hedda Hopper, a gossip journalist, made fun of them. Carole Lombard, an actress, hinted that Grant mailed the bills while Scott paid them. Given that Grant temporarily married and then moved back in with Scott following his divorce, their intimacy compelled conversation. For 12 years, they shared a home. They were simply best buddies, according to some. It was more than that, others muttered. We'll never be certain. However, they abandoned their shared living arrangement and married women in 1944 due to pressure from studios. Nevertheless, they remained lifelong friends. Bonds like that were uncommon in Hollywood. Scott's work in the late 1930s and early 1940s was not limited to westerns. He was involved in everything. He starred in a comedy with Mae West and a musical with Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire in 1936. Also appeared in The Last of the Mohicans as Hawkeye. Leslie Howard was given the opportunity to play Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind, but he was passed over. In addition to Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, he starred in Roberta and Pittsburgh. His ability to switch between genres with grace and intensity was praised by critics. He was not yet simply another cowboy. He was shaped by those years. They developed a sizable fan base and assisted him in discovering his range. He had stopped changing genres by the early 1940s. He adopted the cowboy hat as if it were a natural fit, and westerns became his home. He was adored by directors. According to Michael Curtis, Scott is the only gentleman I've encountered in this line of work. That was significant in a divas-filled industry. Prior to offering him significant roles, Cecil B. DeMille sent him to train at the Pasadena Playhouse. He never caused trouble, listened, and learned. He collaborated with legends like Henry King, Jesse James, and George B. Seitz, the last of the Mohicans. His discipline was revered by them. He was consistently professional, prepared, and on time. He lived up to his reputation as a Southern gentleman behind the scenes. 2 parts. Altered everything. The Last of the Mohicans demonstrated his ability to direct an action movie in 1936. It was fast-paced, action-packed, and only 92 minutes long. Hawkeye, played by Scott, was a kind-hearted hero. In 1939, Jesse James followed. Scott co-starred with Tyrone Power and Henry Fonda as Will Wright. Over $2.3 million was earned by the movie in both the US and Canada. That year, only Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Gone with the Wind performed better. Hollywood was forced to protect animals on production because a particular scene featuring a horse created such a commotion. The movie was that large. Scott desired to serve by the time America joined World War II. A back problem prevented him from enlisting in the Marines. He didn't just sit it out, though. He performed for soldiers while touring military installations with comic Joe Dorita. He produced food for the government on his own ranch. He lifted people's spirits on screen by starring in military films such as Gung Ho, Bombardier, Corvette K-225, and To the Shores of Tripoli. These movies were more than just amusement. They helped to raise spirits. Scott came to represent both imagined and actual American might. He wed Patricia Stillman in 1944. That marriage lasted for more than 40 years, until his death in 1987. Christopher and Sandra are the 2 children they adopted. Scott's family life remained stable and private while other Hollywood relationships burned bright and fast. He found peace in it that many stars never did. He had business acumen as well. He founded Randolph Productions with producer Harry Joe Brown in the late 1940s. Their names Randolph and Brown were blended. Most actors had no control back then. All the calls came from the studios. Scott, however, chose his own projects with Renan, primarily westerns. He was paid more and had more creative control. This choice influenced his latter years in movies. Bad Man's Territory debuted in theaters in 1946. Scott portrayed Mark Rowley, a police officer who had to deal with criminals like the Dalton Gang and Jesse James. The movie earned $557,000 in revenue. It was a lot of money. The audiences adored it. It made Scott a surefire box office hit and spawned 2 sequels. It took some time for Randolph Scott to become a Hollywood legend, but something amazing happened between 1950 and 1953. He entered and remained in the top 10 list of the most popular male stars in America for 4 years in a row. That was uncommon for any performer, but particularly for one who was doing westerns, which weren't often the most popular genre at the box office. Even more unexpectedly, Scott was already in his 50s, but he still made a lot of money from his films. He was making $100,000 a film by 1950, which is equivalent to $1.3 million today. Families from all across the nation, from the rural to the city, waited in line to witness his quiet but effective kind of justice. His admirers ranged from rough ranchers to wide-eyed children and all points in between. He rose above stardom. He turned into a representation. However, that increase went beyond the figures. It had to do with the stories he told and the manner in which he delivered them. He portrayed Bat Masterson, a tough cop ordered to clean up a crazy Kansas town, in the 1947 film Trail Street. There was more to the film than just action. It was vibrant, full of life, and made a healthy $360,000 profit. After killing his best buddy in Gunfighters that same year, Scott was a devastated man attempting to move behind his violent past. He displayed genuine, subdued, and potent anguish. He went one step farther in 1949 with The Walking Hills, a grimy, dusty treasure quest in the desert. Scott stood strong, composed, and incredibly human in the midst of that film's blend of western gritty and noir intrigue. His appearance evolved along with his roles. Scott's visage has transformed by his late 40s. It was sharper, more difficult, and tainted by the light and wind from on-location filming. However, he embraced his age rather than trying to hide it. He seemed more genuine because of his weathered skin and icy gaze. You thought that this man had witnessed difficult things. Even when he remained silent, his expression conveyed stories. Scott stood out even more because of his worn appearance, which brought to mind historical legends like William S. Hart. Big moments and gaudy lines were unnecessary for him. He had the ability to convey a full scene with a single glance. Then came his career's most crucial phase. Scott and Botecher collaborated on 7 westerns between 1956 and 1960. These epics didn't have a large budget. They were tight, slender, and full of significance. A layer of the western hero's suffering, remorse, and loneliness was revealed by each one. The Ran-One cycle is the new name for the movie's 7 Men from Now, The Tall T, Decision at Sundown, Buchanan Rides Alone, Westbound, Ride Lonesome, and Comanche Station. They eliminated the outdated cliches and presented the Western as a hazardous, solitary world where upholding moral principles comes at a price. Scott played a man who was plagued by remorse in 7 Men from Now. A robbery had claimed the life of his wife. He held himself responsible for forcing her to accept the job that ultimately resulted in her death because he was too proud to accept less important employment. Every man he encountered and every move he took was motivated by that suffering. As a charming killer who embodied the darkest aspects of Scott's own personality, Lee Marvin played his competitor. Their conflict was personal as much as physical. There was no triumph at the end of the film. It concluded with a man still bearing his load, aware that peace could not be achieved via retaliation. The Tall T went even deeper a year later. In one scenario, Pat Brennan, played by Scott, attempted to trade candy with a bull. And in some way, that brief moment captured everything. He wasn't a savage. He was a thoughtful man who preferred wit and patience to brute force. He found himself in a hostage situation with vicious murderers and an innocent woman as a result of the story. But it wasn't just the guns that were dangerous. It was the decisions. Would he be able to save her? Could he rely on his adversaries? Could he leave? Every choice had a profound impact, and the strain persisted. The movie is currently included in the National Film Registry as a result. By 1959, Scott was playing one of his most agonizing parts in Ride Lonesome. He portrayed Ben Brigade, a bounty hunter, but he was not interested in the prize. His type of justice was what he desired. His wife had been abducted and murdered years prior. The perpetrator was still at large. Thus, Brigade apprehended the murderer's sibling as bait rather than for cash. Everything is revealed in the last moment as he burns the tree from which his wife was hanged. It wasn't merely a chase that ended with that fire. It was the beginning of recovery. Quiet, strong, and unforgettable. Comanche Station followed. Scott's final Western before retiring in 1960. It was the ideal send-off. He portrayed Jefferson Cody, a man who had been looking for his wife, who had been abducted by the Comanches, for 10 years. He reasoned that perhaps, just possibly, he might locate the woman he was saving. She wasn't the one, though. Nevertheless, he took her home as promised, keeping her safe from men who could harm her. After it was over, he rode away by himself, still looking and yet holding out hope. That was the last thing Scott said. Heroes are not always victorious. At times, they simply continue. Ride the High Country was merely another low-budget Western in 1962. Sam Peckinpah, the filmmaker, was not yet well known. He was youthful, unyielding, and full of concepts that the studio didn't like. The production was troubled from the start. The weather didn't cooperate with MGM's plans to film in the picturesque Mammoth Lakes. Therefore, the studio gave the order to relocate everything to Bronson Canyon in Los Angeles, which is hundreds of miles distant. It was a disastrous change. Enraged by the choice, Peckinpah ensured that the staff and actors remained intoxicated. The mayhem continued on the 6-hour bus ride back to Los Angeles. Joseph Vogel, the head of MGM, slept out after seeing an early edit of the movie. He described it as the worst movie he had ever watched when he woke up. The movie wasn't even given a fair chance by MGM. They pushed it onto double feature's lower half. It was a huge failure in the US. Europe, however, witnessed a change. Ride the High Country suddenly rose to prominence as one of MGM's best successes abroad. And gradually, the movie's standing started to rise. It was chosen to be preserved in the National Film Registry in 1992. What began as a problematic production became a masterpiece. Randolph Scott was at the center of everything. He portrayed Gil Westrom, an elderly former lawyer who finds it difficult to adapt to the ever-changing environment. Around 1905, when the Old West was rapidly disappearing, the novel is set. Scott's aged, somber, and truthful look was ideal for the part. His personality was caught between honor and greed, loyalty and wealth. Scott and Joel McCrea, his co-star, were facing their own twilight behind the camera. The fact that they were real-life icons portraying guys out of time gave the movie a subdued strength. Even more was provided by the cinematography. The entire film felt like a farewell because to Lucien Ballard's delicate autumnal color images. Not only to the frontier but also to the classic Hollywood Western. This was not your typical cowboy movie. It was soulful. Additionally, Scott delivered one of his most moving performances to date. Perhaps the best, perhaps the most sentimental. Scott agreed. He gave up acting permanently after the movie. He didn't want to continue merely to play supporting parts or fade into obscurity. Through Gil Westrom, he had expressed his thoughts. Everything was in that one performance. Regret, pride, doubt, and atonement. Scott said he would never be able to top that. He therefore made no attempt. On his own terms, he departed. Scott, however, was more than simply a smart-ass. He was even more astute for it. He didn't disappear when he retired in 1962. He concentrated on his work. And he outperformed practically everyone in Hollywood at that game. His fortune had grown to $100 million by the middle of the 1960s. Today, that would be about $280 million. That was not how most performers thought. Scott, however, did. He made an early purchase, waited, and saw the numbers rise. He owned more than one mansion. He possessed a great deal of land, particularly in Palm Springs and San Fernando. By 1965, the value of 3 properties alone exceeded $100 million. San Fernando grew rapidly, and Palm Springs became a popular destination. Scott was the first to see it coming. He continued after that. He was a founding member of Corona, California's Park Ridge Country Club in 1927. Later, that course evolved into Cresta Verde, a popular hangout for celebrities like Clark Gable, Burt Lancaster, and Lucille Ball. Although Scott was a golf enthusiast, this was also business. It grew to become one of the oldest courses in the US and continues to attract visitors today. Few people were able to combine profit and personal enthusiasm like he did. Randolph Scott left behind more than just his film legacy when he passed away in 1987. He still had a fortune of about $100 million. He had performed better than most, even after accounting for inflation. In contrast, the current value of Cary Grant's estate was approximately $130 million. Around Katharine Hepburn's, $30 million. Scott's stats were quite impressive. But the tough cowboy began to wane in his last years. He had respiratory difficulties and heart issues. He was often admitted to the hospital due to pneumonia. He was weak by 1987 and required full-time care. He passed away peacefully in his Beverly Hills home on March 2. He was 89. His friend Cary Grant had died only 2 months prior. Only 25 family members showed up for Scott's funeral. It took place close to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he grew up. The service was led by Reverend Billy Graham. In a telegram, President Ronald Reagan referred to Scott as one of Hollywood's best actors.